We live in a world our ancestors would barely recognize. Around the globe, the impact of human ingenuity is now everywhere. We've pushed back the limits of our planet at speeds, depths, and heights that would have left our forebears breathless. Driving all these achievements is humankind's extraordinary gift for invention. Through genius and inspiration, we've created exceptional solutions to complex problems. From the everyday to the spectacular, some good and some not so good. This series celebrates the million ways our great inventions have transformed our world.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
What were the biggest moments in your early childhood? Learning to walk? Starting school? That first feeling of independence?
You feel free, you can have fun, and you just go wherever you want.
As soon as we can walk, we seek thrills. We race and constantly push the limits of our endurance.
So I like to just take it up the top of a mountain and use all that lovely stored up potential energy to go really fast and usually fall off and hurt myself.
Born out of a catastrophic natural disaster on a scale the world hasn't witnessed since. What spawned crazy myths and legends and fueled the movement for equality of the sexes?
For women, it was like unzip that corset, get those bloomers on and get out.
We'll explore the evolution of this brilliant invention. A story of experiment before success.
It doesn't require a motor to work. It's purely mechanical. There are not too many moving parts, and the principles of how it works are really basic.
And we project forward. Where do we ride from here on the amazing bicycle? In today's fast-paced modern world, we ask a lot of the bicycle. We want to get to work, tour our countryside, climb our mountains, and move efficiently around our cities.
I think the bike is such a great invention because it gives people ultimate freedom to get where they want to go under their own steam.
Convenience is everything, and so is choice. You can ride any permutation of bike you like, selecting everything from the color and frame to the number of gears, brake calipers, the exact suspension spec, handlebars, wheels, and the number of spokes. You can choose the frame material and the weight, from an ultra-light carbon fiber road bike weighing around 4 kilograms to a traditional steel version weighing 3 times as much. Each element affects the quality of your ride, but you'll always be able to rely on a bicycle to take you where you want to go.
Bikes are sort of stable, they stay stable. That's why bikes are clever. They stay upright, don't they? That's why people can ride bikes.
It's the perfect marriage of sort of technology and human energy. It has very small environmental impact. Keeps you healthy.
Bicycles allow us to race at extraordinary speeds. There are mind-boggling world records for every type of ride. For example, American Denise Muller-Koronek set a new speed record on the flat in a slipstream. She had to be towed to get her up to speed. The gearing on her bike is so high, she can't move from a standing start. Here's Denise reaching her record-breaking 296 kilometers per hour. On the other hand, you can cheat, as some would have it, on an e-bike, creating your own electricity to power you when the going gets tough. Around 200 years ago, before bicycles, our streets looked very different. Most people relied on their own 2 feet to get around.
Well, it's a world, of course, in which the majority of people walk, and they walk everywhere, and they walk very long distances. And so it's a world in which, for the majority of people, life is pretty slow, travel is pretty slow and pretty arduous.
For more than 5,000 years, horses had been our go-to solution for transportation, for those who could afford one. But horses create a lot of stinky mess.
Before bikes, our streets were dominated by pedestrians, and the only sort of artificial form of transport was the horse, and that led to an awful lot of manure and a public health risk.
Major cities like Paris, seen here in the 1890s, had to cope with the consequences. A horse deposits up to 15 kilos of excrement and a liter of urine per day. 200 years ago, there were about 35,000 horses on the streets of Paris. That meant up to 525 tons of dung daily, and that's a big problem. When the world was stunned by a cataclysmic natural event, our reliance on horses became an even bigger problem. Yet the consequences of this volcanic eruption inspired the invention of the bicycle. In 1815, in what is now Indonesia, Mount Tambora exploded in one of the largest volcanic eruptions ever recorded. The resulting ash cloud affected swathes of Europe and North America. It would have been similar to the 2010 eruption of the Eyjafjallajökull volcano in Iceland. The resulting ash cloud had a global environmental impact, just as the Mount Tambora eruption did 200 years before.
So when you've got a volcanic eruption, they can actually spread this dust cloud quite far across the globe. And that's going to have effects on, cloud seeding, and whether crops are going to be able to survive. So then that affected horses, their food, and that's why they weren't able to sustain themselves so much. So it was a real sort of global catastrophe when this happened.
Records suggest it may have contributed to summer snowfall in Europe and North America. In fact, 1816 became known as the year without a summer, which would have been extremely frightening.
So I think psychologically, this would have created, a fear-based time. It would have been catastrophic for people's livelihoods, and it would have, probably, gone to the place where people get very suspicious and superstitious about what is happening. This is a frightening time.
Thousands of people died as a result. Others lost their livelihoods. Our reliance on horses was pulled into sharp focus, and something had to be done.
It's a period of, some economic distress. Perhaps one of the factors that leads to the development of the first sort of bicycle, which is, there are no horses, there's no money, but there is a desire to move.
We needed an alternative to horses that relied on nothing but ourselves, our ingenuity, creativity, and technical know-how.
There's the famous quote, "Necessity is the mother of invention." Suddenly all the horses are dying because of the eruption. Somebody invents the bicycle because they have to.
However, it wasn't the penny farthing that emerged as the first bicycle. What came first looked like this. Built in 1817 in Mannheim, Germany, by Baron Karl von Drais. He was a prolific inventor and called his invention the Lauf machine, or running machine.
To come up with a way of putting together 2 wheels and a seat that can accommodate one person is already a challenge in itself. How do you attach all these different components in a way that is efficient and easier than, quite frankly, just walking?
You would walk or run to gather momentum and then cruise. The wooden-framed contraption connected 2 scaled-down carriage wheels, a padded saddle, and a rudimentary steering column. To brake, the rider pulled a rope to inhibit the back wheel.
What's beautiful about his design is that it's really looking at balance, at wheels. I mean, just understanding how wheels work and how they can be put together to incorporate and accommodate a human being traveling on it is, design challenge number one for the bicycle.
It was the simple idea of using wheels and human energy that was the genius of von Drais. And this contemporary bike builder agrees.
We've got legs are quite good, but you stick these two wheels and these pedals between it and suddenly we can go further and faster with no extra effort. It's amazing, isn't it?
Von Drais mastered a rudimentary two-wheeled vehicle, but no pedals yet.
He was the first one to really harness the law of conservation of angular momentum to overcome that annoying thing that, things would normally, with only two points, fall over. He was able to stay upright using this machine and the principles of physics.
The bicycle uses several simple machines working together. One of these is called the wheel and axle. A doorknob is a wheel and axle. The steering wheel in an automobile is a wheel and axle too.
Without wheels, there would have been no bikes. The invention of the wheel around 5,500 years ago was a monumental game changer. It would have been impossible to envisage back then how this simple idea would change the world.
I mean, wheels are just great because they sort of harness the power of circular rotation. And that can be used to sort of amplify a force or turn a sort of linear force into rotational, which can then be used to move you somewhere else.
It started as a potter's wheel in Bronze Age Mesopotamia, now Iraq. A simple disc made from a slice of tree trunk with a hole in the middle. We found that we could turn this circular rotating disc upright and saw the potential to create a vehicle. But like a hula hoop, the disc wasn't strong or rigid enough. We added spokes and an axle. Then we could attach it to a cart or a chariot, and the world's first mechanical transportation was invented.
Wheels are fantastic in terms of being able to make things move very efficiently and easily. Now, if you compare to not having a wheel, to just kind of trying to push something against the ground, you are struggling against friction. The operation of a wheel actually fundamentally requires friction because the bottom point of the wheel is always still. It's actually using friction, and it's a pair of forces. So you trying to push the wheel forwards and the friction keeping the bottom of the wheel still gives you a pair of forces which gives you that turning motion, that torque that you require. And because of the size of a wheel, that increases its sort of moment, its sort of leverage. So it's a torque multiplier.
Modern wheels are a combination of rim, spokes, nipples that hold the spokes to the rim, a hub, and then usually an inner tube and tire. These days, a buyer can dictate precisely the design of the wheels to go on their bike.
And once we've got our rim measurement, in this case 573 millimeters, the next job is to input that into a spoke calculator and measure the hub.
This custom-building wheel producer turns out 1,500 sets of wheels a year for discerning buyers.
Wheels are infinitely knowable. They behave exactly how you want them to behave with any given input. And I just get a real kick out of making them. They're a really magical structure.
Each pair is, of course, exactly the same size, as you would expect. Yet in the early stages of the bicycle, the penny farthing appeared. The running machine was a bold start on the road to inventing the bicycle we know and love. But running to turn the wheels didn't quite cut it. What the bicycle needed was better propulsion. It was a conundrum that took another 40 years to solve. Finally, pedals were invented in the 1860s so we could push the wheels forward without our feet touching the ground.
As the basic principles of the bicycle were developed, then additional layers of sophistication were introduced. And so once you've established that design, it's like, how can we go faster? And that's always an engineer's next question, is how can we improve this design? So the next level of design was to attach pedals to the wheel so that you could transform human leg power into forward motion. So essentially, the pedals were driving the front wheel.
We have Frenchman Pierre Lallemand to thank for coming up with the second major step in the development of the bicycle. Pedals were the solution to steering and propulsion, allowing us to convert energy from our legs directly to the wheels.
So pedals, they seem obvious to us now, but they were actually a genius addition to this running machine, because now instead of relying on our little legs to sort of push along the ground, we could make a relatively small downward motion on these pedals, which are attached to a smaller circle, and this would be multiplied as sort of using the greater diameter of the wheel that they were attached to. This force would be multiplied so that you could achieve greater speeds by relatively little force input.
They took the rider's feet off the ground. However, the velocipede de pédale required the rider to balance. And that presents a challenge to every bike rider.
Don't ride your bike on the school grounds, and above all, never be a show-off.
I remember my uncle was holding the seat, trying to help me balance, and then when he let go, I felt that transition from relying on his stability to relying on my own.
It was only after we had a vehicle on two wheels driven by pedals that the high-wheeler came along. Invented by another Frenchman, Eugène Maillet, it was the first bicycle to have solid rubber tires on its extreme wheels. The theory was that one revolution of the pedals meant one revolution of the wooden front wheel. Therefore, the bigger the front wheel, the further you travel.
The small radius of a pedal cycle powered the large radius of the penny farthing wheel, which meant that for a small amount of energy, you could travel over longer distances, all thanks to the actual diameter of the penny farthing wheel.
Speed racing these mean machines took off, and a world time trial record was set in 1886 in America by William Rowe. He reached a distance of 35.5 kilometers in 1 hour. A high-wheeler racing record that remains unbroken to this day. But the penny farthing was not an easy ride. Hard to mount, hard to stop, and therefore downright dangerous.
Penny farthing is the most ridiculous bike ever created. I mean, have you ever tried getting on one of those things? It's a nightmare.
It also had a tendency to pitch forward when it hit a rut or stone on the road. However, that didn't deter the enthusiasts who relished the challenge. A penny farthing team even featured at the unofficial 1906 Athens Olympics in a synchronized demonstration of precision and skill. Penny farthings have had an enduring legacy. These guys racing them for fun in the 1950s make it look easy. But they were in common usage in everyday life for only about 20 years. Something a lot safer was just around the corner. British engineer James Starley embellished the original design and unveiled his version in 1871. Its wheels inspired the nickname penny farthing after two British coins of the day. The next big step in the evolution of the bicycle was to power it through the rear wheel, not the front. Starley introduced a chain drive, which meant the pedals drove the rear wheel without actually being attached to it. His design, called the safety bicycle, was much closer to the two-wheeled pedaling machine we still use today. Now the front wheel was just for steering, and the wheels were metal-rimmed with taut metal spokes to keep them rigid.
The whole purpose of the bicycle chain is to transfer the force from the rider to the back wheel that's powering the forward motion. All the power that you're putting into the pedals is being distributed between the front and the back wheel, but essentially the chain is directing all that power specifically to the back wheel, and the front wheel is used more for steering.
Within a few decades, we had developed an efficient two-wheeled pedal-powered machine thanks to human ingenuity and our thirst for invention. It had all started with Carl von Drais and his crude running machine, which proved to be full of potential. But is this really where the invention of the bicycle began? The story goes that centuries before von Drais, the Renaissance genius Leonardo da Vinci designed this. Extraordinarily, it had two identical wheels, pedals, and a chain. Da Vinci was responsible for so many great ideas that led to inventions, such as his flying machine or his parachute, so it seemed plausible. In 1974, Italians were thrilled when this previously unknown sketch was discovered. It was attributed to a student attached to Da Vinci's studio, copying the great master's original. Since it appeared on the back of bona fide sketches by Da Vinci, it was convincing. But how could it be possible? How could such an important design by the great Leonardo have been ignored, forgotten? Of course, it proved to be a big, crazy hoax. It's a mystery who did draw the image, but we know for sure that Da Vinci did not dream up the concept of a bicycle. By the end of the 19th century, bicycles were firmly established, popular among young men in New York, Paris, and London. In Germany in 1886, the Opel factory expanded from sewing machines to penny farthings. Soon they were copying the safety bicycle, and the business grew to become the largest bike manufacturer in the world by the 1920s. Early global expansion coincided with a new sector of society joining in the fun. But at first, it was deemed completely inappropriate for half the population to ride a bicycle. Men made sure women knew their place.
Back in those days, it was said, "Oh, this is ridiculous. Can't have women riding bikes. It's just not proper. It's not ladylike."
Until the emancipation movement emerged, this was an era of conformity, subservience, and modesty.
We're talking Victorian women. You know, at that time for women, their worlds would have been very small. I mean, it would have been about, getting married, having children, being pretty near a fainting couch because you had to wear those corsets that were absolutely confining, and your life, as I would say, as a Victorian woman, would have been absolutely, utterly confined by so many restrictions. And in comes the bicycle, and the potential for women must have been huge.
Middle-class women had been expected to marry, have babies, obey their husbands, dress demurely, and not step out of line. The lure of the bicycle demanded some enormous risks.
I'm sure around that time, the first women on bikes would have probably faced harassment. I know that certainly in the medical profession, women were warned not to cycle because it would have an adverse effect on, their baby-making abilities and all of this nonsense, just to keep them restricted. So I think for women, it was like unzip that corset, get those bloomers on and get out.
At the time, they were wearing layers of petticoats, bustles, and long skirts that trailed on the ground. Clothing that was designed to enhance their shape with tight corsets. But change was in the air. As women's expectations and confidence grew, they began to want what they'd never had: independence and equality.
It's the age of what's sometimes called the new woman. It's the age of women, particularly middle-class women, who are beginning to receive the same kind of education as their brothers, who are beginning to enter the professions, who are beginning to get a sense of independent life.
Their clothing had become a trap, totally unsuitable for cycling. Skirts would get caught up in wheel spokes and pedals, which caused accidents, even fatalities. When braver, independent-thinking female cyclists started to wear bloomers, a kind of pantaloon, instead of numerous petticoat layers, they were treated with derision. Occasionally, they were even arrested for indecency. There was displeasure that women were not behaving properly.
There's a sense that, decent women don't do this kind of thing. There's a sense in which it can be seen as a quite alternative thing. And there is a way in which cycling, both for men and for women in the 1880s, 1890s, is the kind of thing that slightly rebellious figures do. It's the kind of thing that, isn't wholly proper.
But there was no way back. Cycling gave women freedom. They changed their clothes, shed their chaperones, and embraced their newfound liberation. Meanwhile, inventors were continuing to play with ideas that could improve the comfort of the ride. Another game-changing invention that would take the bike riding experience to a new, smoother level. Something that connects this gigantic plane with bicycles. These days, traveling a long distance often means a plane journey. At any one time, there can be nearly 10,000 planes in the sky, carrying around 1.3 million people. Each aircraft is able to take off and land comfortably, thanks in part to an enterprising Scottish vet. When his young son became ill, doctors prescribed exercise to help his recovery. John Boyd Dunlop encouraged his son to ride his tricycle, but he noticed how uncomfortable he was. He already knew how bumpy the roads were from traveling in horse-drawn carriages. Boyd started experimenting using the stock of rubber sheets he used on his operating table. Decades earlier, this vulcanized rubber had been patented by Charles Goodyear. After processing, it was more water, heat, and winterproof than ordinary rubber. Dunlop found that a vulcanized rubber tire filled with air gave a much more comfortable ride. Basically, it absorbed shocks from the road better than the previously solid rubber tires.
The time of the bicycle, roads were not particularly smooth. So the idea behind this sort of pneumatic tire is having this sort of rubber balloon or inflatable that gives you great grip. But also, it has that sort of cushioning. It has that ability to shape around the ground underneath it to give you a really good contact point with the ground and therefore utilize that friction and that torque that you get to propel yourself forwards.
Dunlop patented the pneumatic tire and gave up practicing as a vet to start a tire factory. Could Dunlop or Goodyear have imagined that the combination of their pneumatic tires made from vulcanized rubber would be capable of bearing a jumbo jet's maximum landing weight of around 270 tons? Not to mention the world's estimated 2 billion bikes. The finished article, with its pedals, chain, and 2 wheels, and comfortable tires to soak up the bumps, is the very essence of the bicycle, from which all design since is simply a permutation. And it occupies a vital space in history.
The bike represents the democratization of transport, much more than anything else. It enables ordinary people to travel great distances that only the rich could do before.
One of the first commercial users of these more comfortable, reliable bicycles was the early postal services. For 100 years or more since, bicycles became the vehicle of choice for mail and newspaper deliveries in many countries. The humble bicycle also became an important combat vehicle. Switzerland created the Swiss bicycle infantry around the turn of the 20th century. By the beginning of the First World War, French soldiers were also assigned bicycles. When fuel was rationed, they saved on vital reserves, and soldiers could travel a lot further cycling rather than by marching.
Both world wars rely upon bikes. They rely upon bikes because that's what's available, that's what's cheap. That enables the French soldiers to dash out as the Germans invade. It also enables them to get back. People again use technology, and cheap technology is more widely available than anything else.
Germany had become one of the world's leading bicycle manufacturing countries in the early 20th century. And thousands of German soldiers were also issued bicycles in wartime. Their popularity and practicality didn't wane post-war. Bicycles became synonymous with communist regimes that wanted to encourage thrift and no frills among the proletariat. In Chairman Mao Zedong's Cultural Revolution beginning in 1960s China, the bicycle became the government-approved form of transport. Their adaptability and versatility made them a no-brainer. Customized bicycles could be loaded up with vegetables, fish, and anything else you can think of. Versatility could mean this, too. 11 Chinese acrobats showed what else could be done and the fun you can have on 2 wheels. Contemporary mass manufacturing adapts quickly to change. Engineers create universal templates for their designs, which satisfy the demands of a typical rider, millions of them, at an affordable cost. This Chinese bicycle factory claims to be the world's largest. Everything here is on an epic scale. 60 bicycle frame production lines, 20 spray painting lines, and over 50 bicycle assembly lines. Its manufacturing capacity is 20 million units every year, which equates to 10% of global output in one single factory. Its massive steel frame welding base has more than 100 robots doing much of the welding. There's a separate aluminum frame section with specialized cutting, mass dipping in phosphate, and heat treatment to strengthen the frames. The bespoke customer buying here can order a mountain bike frame that matches their exact specifications, but always in steel.
I've learned a lot about how bikes behave from making them, and I've realised that what I'm doing is good for what they're used for.
The weight of every component can be critical for some riders, especially in competition. And yet in this case, light materials such as carbon fiber or aluminum are deliberately not being used.
Steel is tough. It's got a really nice ride feel. It's got a little bit of spring to it. It feels lively when you ride it, a steel bike. I like the sort of aesthetics of a steel bike. With carbon fibre, you can make complex shapes. Steel actually limits the shapes that you can have because you can generally only have pretty straight tubes, slight bends. It has to be simple to work, but then that allows you to create this simple aesthetic. And aesthetics is important because if you sit on a bike, if it looks nice, you feel confident in it. And everybody buys bikes for what they look like. They won't admit to it, but most people buy bikes for what they look like. And it's very important that you feel confident on it and you ride well. So yeah, steel I think is a really good material for mountain bikes.
The good bike rider is easy to recognize. He makes sure his bicycle is always in perfect mechanical condition. He learns how to ride and knows all the bicycle rules and traffic laws before riding on the streets. He is considerate of pedestrians, and he always locks his bicycle.
By 1970, cycling was America's most popular outdoor pursuit, with an estimated 75 million riders and 50 million bikes. Bicycles cropped up in popular culture, notably at the movies. Think of the kids who rode their bikes to save E.T. from the evil scientists in 1982.
So the bike becomes a symbol of a kind of comfortable technology, symbolised in E.T. as we see this extraordinary figure from another world who is brought to Earth. And what's the symbol of that? What's the symbol of his arrival on Earth? It's the bike. It's the bike because the bike is something everyone has. But it's also a sign of human ingenuity, and the bringing of the familiar and the technological together in the bike.
Enthusiasts started making serious modifications to their bikes to take on some of the more challenging local terrain. Within a few years, manufacturers developed viable mass-produced versions for mountain biking.
I love doing downhill mountain biking, so I like to just take it up the top of a mountain and use all that lovely stored up potential energy to go really fast and usually fall off and hurt myself.
Mountain bikes are built for rough paths, hills, obstacles, and speed.
Everybody with bikes believes weight is the most important thing. For Chris Froome, trying to save 100 grams might make 10 seconds difference over his 4-hour rides, and that might be the difference between winning and losing. So it matters, but even for him, I think if you strapped a kilogram to his bike, he would still win. For me, riding my mountain bike up a hill, it just doesn't matter. I weigh 75 kilos. My bike and all my kit might add 20 kilos to that. Saving a kilogram in weight is a tiny percentage of the weight you're saving. The elder gentleman with disposable income will spend huge amounts of money on saving weight on the bike, and it doesn't make a difference. What's much more important is that it fits them, and so weight is a bit of a marketing metric.
There have been plenty of modifications to satisfy our thirst for cycling. Some have been a groundbreaking success, and some not so much. Tricycles provide stability and the option of moving cargo around without fear of tipping or falling. Perfect for very young riders. The hand cycle is a 3-wheeled cycle propelled by the rider using their arms, designed for those without use of their lower limbs. Cycling is recommended for mental health too.
As a therapist, I see a lot of people who use different techniques for mental well-being, and cycling is one of them, particularly for people who have gone through a period of depression. Sometimes overthinking leads to inaction, and something about having a bike and just getting on your bike and doing actually changes the way you feel and the way you think about what's going on in your world.
Bicycles made for two are a winner for visually impaired riders. They sit behind the guide who steers.
Even cycling's possible if you've got someone to steer for you.
Generally, it works better if the heavier, stronger rider is the pilot up front. A tandem tends to go faster downhill than a conventional bicycle, but slower uphill because it can be difficult to synchronize uphill pedaling. And then there's the bicycle for 6. This confection was built in the early 1900s and must have been a gas to ride. Whatever the wheel or ride, the spokes are a whole geeky subject on their own. Spokes came along about 4,000 years ago, once the wheel was being used for transportation in chariots. Spokes transfer power from the hub of the wheel to the outside of the wheel. Importantly, they also provide rigidity and strength. Today, riders can choose the number of spokes and depth, both of which can affect performance. The thinner the spoke, the more elastic it is, which reduces fatigue. Thicker, more numerous spokes mean better power transfer from rider to bike.
So 12 at 284 and 12 at 282 mil.
24 spokes is typical. but up to 48 is possible. A penny farthing might have 72. For the weight obsessed, the fewer the spokes, the lighter the wheel's overall weight. Cutting and lacing the spokes are specialist skills. The tension they're set at is also crucial to performance, and each spoke is individually tightened.
So I can now start to feel tension ramping up in the wheel. Whilst before my spokes were loose, they're now becoming tight. We're aiming for about 125 kilos of force per spoke. You could argue that a wheel is held together by about 4 tons of compressive force.
Seriously strong. It's a very precise business, and every little thing is measured.
The hardest part of wheel building, the most difficult part to learn and master, is in making the wheel straight and tension balancing it. The use of tensionometers and making sure to keep everything to high tolerances.
On Sunday afternoons, you could pedal out past the city limits and see real trees and grass and hear a bird sing. That was fun. As long as your legs held out, you could go wherever you wanted.
Riding a bicycle gives you freedom, which can be interpreted in its own way. The World Naked Bike Ride event is gathering traction. In 2019, riders in 70 cities across 20 countries let go of their inhibitions and celebrated the bicycle.
Riding a bicycle is such a beautiful thing. You know, using pedal power is a great way to keep fit, and it's so environmentally friendly.
You feel free, you can have fun, and you just go wherever you want.
With or without your clothes on. The bicycle has been around for 200 years, pretty much unchanged. It's hard to imagine a world without it.
Bicycles are unbelievably efficient in terms of the energy that goes into them and the energy that they output. Under the right conditions, cycling can be up to 3 times more efficient than walking.
Climate change, polluting fuels, and too many people doing sedentary jobs leads to more people cycling for their health and for environmental reasons. By 2016, it was claimed that the streets of Copenhagen had more bikes than cars. But in China, bicycle sharing schemes over-anticipated initial demand, with piles of them abandoned, confiscated, or broken in bicycle graveyards like this one in Shanghai. Nevertheless, in many big cities around the world, you can hire a bike by the hour to zoom around twice as quickly as motorized traffic.
Cities where people cycle more are healthier and we have less pollution is great. So I can see a very bright future for bicycles if we get our urban planning right.
Traffic is the biggest barrier for cyclists. The pollution it creates and the dangers it poses. These days, progressive cities do provide cycle lanes as a safety measure, although these don't solve the problem altogether. Germany is building a national cycle highway, aiming to connect 10 cities and to remove 50,000 cars from the roads by turning those drivers into cyclists. A fresh approach to urban planning would mean prioritizing the cyclist over the motorist. That might be easier said than done. However, it might get reluctant riders on their bikes.
It's a sort of dangerous environment which largely stems from the culture of driving and the types of drivers that you get in London. Unless you can completely overhaul that, or perhaps even just completely separate out, cycling areas from where cars are, then I'm not feeling safe to get on one.
Head injuries account for most deaths in cycling road accidents, yet it's easy enough to wear a fitted helmet. However, a study in Australia, where they're compulsory, found that 15.7% of cyclists would ride their bicycle more if they didn't have to wear a helmet. Riding a bike gives nearly every part of your body a fairly comprehensive workout and gets you where you want to go with zero impact on the environment.
What makes bikes so brilliant is that they're these incredibly efficient machines. We can power with our own bodies and yet make us go as fast as a horse, or as fast as a car in some cases. And yet they're also very simple machines. They just require a bit of metal and some simple gearing. And it means it's something that everybody can afford to have in some way or another.
It's also good for your pocket. According to one estimate, the average British motorist will spend about $125,000 on car fuel in their lifetime. If you only cycled throughout your whole life, look how much you'd save, while also doing your bit for the environment and your health.
Cycling can be beneficial for chronic heart disease, also for preventing type 2 diabetes, as well as even stroke. The other great thing about cycling, of course, is that it's considered a low-impact sport, which means that it doesn't put too much pressure on our joints. So for individuals that may have arthritis or other degenerative joint conditions, it can be really useful for them.
We like the idea of exercise and reducing pollution, but problem. We don't always like hills or cycling into strong winds. Solution? Easy to use, environmentally friendly. The modern answer looks like this. The electric bike, or e-bike, almost identical to a traditional push bike.
Most of them are sort of power assist or pedal assist bicycles. So, they've basically got a big battery in them and a motor that can drive the wheels. It's there to help kind of even out the ride and smooth things along because, we've all tried to cycle up a hill and perhaps put it in the wrong gear, and it's a real struggle to go up. And the whole idea behind that is you can use, quite powerful electric motors with a lot of torque that will just sort of assist where needed and reactively do so to make that sort of ride nice and smooth. So you're not putting all the effort in these sort of big pushes like you sometimes do.
In pedal assist designs, the motor is built into one of the wheel hubs. The battery contains the power to move you along. It must provide plenty of energy, last a long time, yet be lightweight. Then it will carry you for up to 145 kilometers if you pedal to keep it charged. Recharging takes from 2 to 8 hours, depending on size. In 2017, there were believed to be around 200 million e-bikes on the world's roads, and the figure has been rising daily. Almost half of those e-bikes are in China. The biggest consumer in Europe is Germany. Meanwhile, e-bicycle sales in the Netherlands have now overtaken sales of conventional pedal bikes. Globally, predictions suggest that by 2050, annual sales will reach 84 million units.
There's a way in which they're perhaps heralds of the future. They're perhaps a sign of what we'll do when we can't drive cars through our cities, perhaps a sign of what we'll do when we've finally accepted that the internal combustion engine is really rather a bad thing.
When once the car and other motorized vehicles looked like they might take over the world, the bike is looking stronger than ever.
I would like to think that bike riding will become more popular in the future because there's such a clean and non-polluting way of getting people around that's remarkably efficient.
We worry about the planet. We worry about ourselves, our health, and our future. For 200 years, since the first Draisienne running machine, the bicycle has offered us free, climate-friendly travel. In the early days, saving us from being overrun in dung, to today, reducing air pollution from motorized traffic.
It's me and the bike, and we're on kind of this journey together. And it kind of almost exercises, your brain, your soul. It does all of that stuff in one, and it's cheap.
Bicycles feel like a great future-proof invention in an uncertain world.
I think the bicycle has been so successful because it's so wonderfully simple.
I think it's kind of brilliant in that way that technology and humans actually merge together in quite a beautiful way.